The story begins not on a grand stage, but inside a modest red brick church on a street in Newark, New Jersey. It is early morning, sometime in the late 1960s, and the air still holds the coolness of the night just past. Sunlight slants through tall stained glass windows, scattering soft pools of amber, rose, and pale blue across the wooden pews. The building is quiet, except for the gentle creak of old floorboards and the distant sound of a door opening. A woman walks in, holding the hand of a small girl with big, curious eyes. That girl is Whitney Elizabeth Houston, barely old enough to read, but already carrying a melody inside her heart that will one day touch every corner of the earth. The church is called New Hope Baptist, and it is here that her voice will first learn to rise like a morning bird. For now, the child watches her mother, Sissy Houston, walk toward the choir loft. Sissy is a gifted singer herself, and she believes that a sacred space like this, with its hushed reverence and golden light, is the best place for a soul to learn to sing. The little girl follows, her patent leather shoes making a soft tapping sound on the wood. Above them, the vaulted ceiling disappears into shadows, but a single sunbeam catches the edge of the organ pipes, making them glow like a promise. This is a world of gentle rituals, of hymn books placed neatly in their racks, of the faint scent of lemon polish on the pews. Outside, the city is beginning to stir, but here, time moves slowly, wrapped in the calm of devotion. In the long afternoons, after school has released its children into the amber light of the street, Whitney often returns to the church. She is not alone. Her family life revolves around music. Her mother rehearses, and her cousin Dionne Warwick is already a rising star. The air inside the church is always a little cooler, a refuge from the summer heat that shimmers on the asphalt outside. Whitney sits in the front row, her legs dangling, watching the choir arrange itself in a half circle. The director lifts his hand, and a wave of harmony fills the room, as gentle as a tide. Sometimes Sissy smiles at her daughter, and Whitney feels a warmth spread through her chest. She knows every word of every hymn by heart, even if she is still too shy to sing out loud. The stained glass above depicts a serene pastoral scene, a shepherd with a flock, a lamb cradled in his arms. The light passes through the glass and paints the child's face in shades of green and gold. She traces patterns on the pew cushion with her finger, letting the music wash over her. It is not a lesson, not a practice, it is simply the fabric of her life, soft and familiar. In the quiet moments between songs, she can hear the old clock on the wall ticking, each second a tiny anchor holding her in this peaceful present. When evening arrives, the Houston home on a tree-lined street in East Orange glows with kitchen light. It is a 3-story house with a generous front porch and lace curtains that flutter in the breeze. After dinner, the family often gathers in the living room, where a well-loved upright piano stands against the wall. Here, the music continues in a different key, more intimate, more playful. Sissy plays a few chords, and her daughter joins in, still uncertain but growing bolder. The room is decorated with framed photographs and souvenirs from travels, but what matters most is the sound filling the space. It is a sound that seems to come from some deep, quiet place, even when the notes are high. The neighbors walking their dogs past the house might pause and listen, then continue on, not realizing they have just heard the first stirrings of a voice that will define an era. The street outside is calm, lined with maple trees whose leaves rustle softly in the dark. A street lamp casts a cone of golden light on the sidewalk, and a cat pads silently along the fence. Inside, the child sings a simple spiritual, and her mother's eyes glisten. The world is far away, and the night wraps them both in a gentle hush. Sundays are the heart of the week, and the New Hope Baptist Church swells with the community. Dressed in their best clothes, the congregation fills the pews, and the air grows thick with the scent of perfume, polished shoes, and the faint dust of hymnals. Today, young Whitney is allowed to stand with the choir. She is 9 years old, and her voice, though still young, has a clarity that makes people turn their heads. The organ begins with a low, rumbling hum, then rises like a wave, and the choir joins in. Whitney's voice floats above the rest, clear as a stream, and the man in the third row stops fanning himself with a program. The light falls through the rose window now, casting jeweled patterns on the white robes of the singers. It is a moment of pure, unguarded beauty. No one is recording it, no one is watching except the faithful few, and that is precisely why it is so genuine. The song ends, and a deep silence holds the room for a breath before the organist plays the next chord. The child feels something she cannot name, a connection to the music that goes beyond words, and she smiles, just a little, as the afternoon sun warms her back through the glass. Outside the church, the neighborhood life moves at a dreamy pace. Children play double dutch on the sidewalk, their ropes slapping the pavement in a steady rhythm, while old men sit on stoops reading newspapers. A motorized cart sells flavored ice, and the sound of its bell echoes down the street. Whitney walks home with her mother, their footsteps slow and easy. The sky is a soft blue, with a few clouds moving like sleepy sheep. Trees cast dappled shadows that shift with the breeze. Newark in those years is a place of hardworking families, of front gardens with roses and tomato plants, of music drifting out of open windows. It is a city of brick and iron, but softened by the green of parks and the laughter of children. For Whitney, it is the only world she knows, a world that fits her like a comfortable song. She will carry these images with her always, the morning light in the church, the sound of her mother's voice teaching her a melody, the feel of the wooden pew under her hand. They become the quiet foundation upon which a monumental career will be built, but right now, they are simply the texture of a happy childhood captured in the amber glow of memory. As the years pass, the girl grows taller, her voice growing stronger and more confident. She begins solo performances at the church, and the congregation listens with a hush that feels like a prayer. In the balcony, the wooden benches are worn smooth by decades of worshippers, and the afternoon light streams through the large arched window, illuminating dust motes that dance slowly in the air. Whitney stands at the microphone, her eyes closed, and the song seems to pour out of her without effort. The audience is moved not by spectacle, but by the simple truth of the sound. It is a voice that seems to understand both joy and sorrow, though the singer is still just a teenager. The pastor watches from his chair, nodding gently, as if he knew all along that this child was special. Outside, the sun begins its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of peach and lavender, and the street lamps wink on one by one. In this sacred space, time is measured not by the clock, but by the rise and fall of a melody. And when the last note fades, there is a collective sigh, a quiet exhale of gratitude, before the rustle of coats signals it is time to go home. The final quiet image of these early years is Whitney at 15, sitting on the front steps of her house at dusk. The neighborhood is settling into night, and the air carries the scent of freshly watered lawns. She hums a tune under her breath, something she heard on the radio mixed with a hymn from morning service. A few blocks away, the lights of downtown Newark glitter like a handful of scattered coins. The girl wraps her arms around her knees and watches the sky deepen from blue to indigo. She cannot know that in just a few years, her voice will carry her far beyond these familiar streets, to stages in Europe, Asia, and every corner of America. She cannot know that she will be called simply the voice. But in this moment, that future is no more than a gentle dream, floating in the evening air like the sound of a distant train. The church bell tolls slowly, 9 times, and the sound drifts across the rooftops, blessing the night with its steady, patient rhythm. The world is at peace, and so is the girl on the steps, wrapped in the soft cloak of twilight, singing a song only the stars can hear. In the late 1970s, Whitney is no longer the little girl in the choir. She is a young woman with a serene beauty and a voice that blossoms like night jasmine. But her path to the recording studio is a gentle one, full of ordinary days. She works briefly as a model, her face appearing in magazine pages with a soft, unassuming grace. The photography studios are large, open lofts in Manhattan, with white walls and floors that reflect the enormous soft boxes of light. Whitney stands before the camera in simple dresses, her expression calm, as if she is listening to a distant song. The photographer asks her to tilt her chin slightly, and she does, her eyes catching the light like still water. Between shots, She sits in a folding chair sipping tea, watching the assistants adjust the backdrops. The hum of the city outside is muted, a distant murmur. It is a quiet life, one that allows her to dream without pressure. But even then, executives from record companies have begun to notice her, hearing in her demo tapes something extraordinary. Clive Davis, the head of Arista Records, invites her to his office not with a grand gesture, but with a simple phone call. Whitney takes the train to the city, her heart beating quietly, not with nerves, but with the calm sense of a door opening. She walks through the midtown streets as evening falls, the lights of the skyscrapers beginning to flicker on against a deep blue sky. Everything feels possible, yet perfectly still. The recording studio where Whitney begins to craft her first album is a hidden world, tucked away in a nondescript building near the Hudson River. The session rooms are softly lit, thick carpets muffling footsteps, and the walls are covered in warm wood panels that absorb sound. An engineer adjusts dials in the control room, and through the large window, Whitney stands before a vintage microphone, headphones resting around her neck. She takes a breath, and when she sings, the sound is so pure that the producer stops writing in his notebook and simply listens. The light in the booth is a soft amber glow, reflecting off the glass, and the only movement is the slow rise and fall of her chest. Outside the window, the river glides by under a gray winter sky, occasional tugboats making their quiet way downstream. The hours pass without drama, just one take after another, each version a little closer to perfection. When they listen back, her voice seems to come from deep within the soul, a place untouched by fear or ambition. During breaks, Whitney sits on a leather sofa in the lounge, flipping through magazines, eating a sandwich, talking softly with the background vocalists. It feels less like work and more like a gathering of friends, sharing music in a comfortable living room. The early sessions yield songs that will become instant classics, but at the time, no one can predict the scale of what is coming. The studio is a time capsule of 1980s technology, analog tape machines that hiss softly, patch bays with a maze of cables, and a piano that has been tuned so meticulously that each note hangs in the air like a crystal. Whitney brings her mother to some sessions, and Sissy sits quietly in the corner, knitting or reading, her presence a grounding force. The producer, Narada Michael Walden, a gentle and meticulous musician, works long hours, shaping the sound with a painter's touch. He knows that the key is not to burden Whitney's voice with too many layers, but to let it breathe in open space. So the arrangements are like clear water, with soft keyboard pads, gentle bass lines, and the lightest touch of percussion. When they record the ballad, Saving All My Love for You, the studio is bathed in a dim, warm light, and everyone in the control room holds their breath. Whitney finishes the last note, and there is a long, profound silence before anyone speaks. It is the kind of silence that follows a prayer, and it tells them everything they need to know. Outside, the night has settled over the city, the streets glistening with a recent rain, and the lights across the river in New Jersey twinkle in quiet response. Away from the studio, Whitney's New York life is one of simple pleasures. She lives in a small apartment in Fort Lee, just across the George Washington Bridge, a place with a view of the Hudson River and the Manhattan skyline. In the early morning, she makes coffee and sits by the window, watching the river traffic begin its slow dance. The light is clear and golden, painting the room in shades of honey. She might read a magazine or listen to a cassette tape of a new song, but mostly she just sits, enjoying the stillness before the day begins. Her neighbors are friendly but respectful, and she often walks to a local diner for breakfast, a tall, slender young woman in a trench coat, ordering scrambled eggs and toast like anyone else. No one bothers her. She is not yet the sort of celebrity who must hide behind sunglasses. These quiet rituals keep her anchored, a counterweight to the gentle pressure building around her career. In the evenings, she sometimes visits her parents' house in New Jersey, sitting on the same porch steps where she dreamed as a girl, now sharing stories of the studio, the songs, the people she has met. The conversation is easy, accompanied by the creak of the porch swing and the distant sound of a train whistle. The night settles around them like a comfortable blanket, and for a while, the future waits patiently in the shadows. One weekend, Clive Davis hosts a small gathering at his country home in upstate New York. It is a modest, elegant house surrounded by rolling hills and the first blush of autumn color. The guests include music industry colleagues and a few artists, but the atmosphere is relaxed, a country afternoon with wine and cheese on the patio. Whitney arrives wearing a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking more like a college student than a rising star. The conversation drifts from topic to topic, laughter rising occasionally like the steam from teacups. At sunset, someone asks her to sing. There is no stage, no microphone, just the lawn sloping down to a pond that reflects the orange sky. Whitney stands under the branches of an old oak tree, the leaves rustling softly, and she begins to sing an a cappella rendition of a gospel hymn. Her voice floats over the water, and the guests fall silent, their glasses paused halfway to their lips. Two deer at the edge of the woods lift their heads and listen, then disappear back into the trees. The moment is ephemeral, a gift offered without fanfare. When she finishes, the only sound is the croaking of frogs and the soft applause of a few leaves falling. It is a memory those present will carry with them forever, a glimpse of the power of a voice unadorned by production, as natural as the wind in the trees. As the debut album nears completion, the final listening session is held in a sleek Manhattan mastering studio. The room is dark except for the glow of equipment lights, and the speakers are large, mounted flush into the wall. Whitney sits in the center of a leather couch, her hands folded in her lap, listening to the songs she has poured her soul into. The playback is flawless, and for the first time, she hears the record not as a collection of tracks, but as a story. Each note, each breath, has been captured with absolute precision. The closing track fades, and a long silence fills the room. Then the engineer switches on the low ambient lights, and everyone turns to look at her. She nods slowly, her eyes glistening but serene. There is no celebration with champagne or bright lights, just quiet handshakes and murmured congratulations. Outside the window, the city moves on, taxis crawling down avenues, the neon signs of Times Square blinking far below. But inside this soundproof cocoon, time feels suspended. Whitney thanks the team softly, her voice carrying the same grace she brings to her singing. She steps out onto the sidewalk, the night air cool on her cheeks, and looks up at the starless Manhattan sky, knowing, in some deep and peaceful part of herself, that everything is about to change. Yet she feels no hurry, no hunger, only a gentle readiness, like a ship waiting for the tide. The album Whitney Houston is released in the spring of 1985, and the world responds like a meadow opening to the first warm day. The songs are not just hits, they become companions in people's living rooms, on their car radios, and in the quiet hours of the night. The cover art is a beautiful close-up of Whitney against a soft white background, her head tilted, a serene expression on her face. In record stores across America, the vinyl record sits in display windows, catching the afternoon light. The streets outside are bustling with people in shoulder pads and pastel colors, but inside, where the needle drops onto the groove, time slows down. Whitney's voice fills the space, and listeners close their eyes. In suburban homes, mothers play the cassette on the family stereo while folding laundry, the sound drifting through the hallway like a warm breeze. In city apartments, couples slow dance in their kitchens to "You Give Good Love," the only light coming from the street lamp outside. The music is everywhere, yet it never feels intrusive. It is simply a beautiful background to ordinary life, a lullaby for grown-ups. Whitney herself, however, remains largely the same person who once sat on the church steps. She moves through this new world with a quiet poise, refusing to be swept away. She buys a lovely home in Mendham, New Jersey, a few hours from the noise of the city. The house is a spacious colonial with sturdy white columns and a long driveway lined with old oaks. Inside, the rooms are filled with soft furniture, family photographs, and the occasional award plaque already beginning to accumulate. But the most important feature is the sunlight. Large windows let the morning pour in like liquid honey, illuminating the polished wood floors and creating long, peaceful shadows. Whitney often sits in the sunroom with a cup of herbal tea, gazing out at the garden where squirrels chase each other around the trunk of a magnolia tree. Here, she can be herself, away from the interviews and the flashbulbs. She calls her mother every day, and sometimes the conversation is nothing more than a comfortable silence shared over the phone line. The garden in the backyard is her sanctuary, a place where roses bloom in soft pinks and whites, and a wooden bench invites long afternoons of daydreaming. The air smells of fresh grass and the faint perfume of blossoms, and the only sound is the buzz of bees and the distant song of a bird. During this time, Whitney performs at elegant venues around the world, but always with a sense of grace rather than wild spectacle. Picture a concert hall in Stockholm, the chandeliers dimmed, the audience sitting in red velvet seats like a calm sea. The stage is bathed in a deep blue light, and Whitney walks to the microphone in a long, shimmering gown that catches the light like stardust. The band begins to play softly, and she launches into The Greatest Love of All, a song that has become an anthem of quiet self-empowerment. Her voice fills the auditorium, but it never overwhelms. It soothes, it reassures. In the audience, a mother holds her daughter's hand, both of them motionless, tears glistening in the low light. On stage, Whitney closes her eyes, and for a moment, the massive venue shrinks to the size of a small chapel. She sings the final note, and instead of a roar, there is a sustained, reverent hush, as if the entire room is taking one collective breath. Then the applause comes, but even it is gentle, respectful, a standing ovation that feels more like a communal embrace. The curtains close, and backstage, Whitney sits quietly in her dressing room, the bouquet of flowers a small galaxy of color on the vanity. She removes her earrings carefully, taking a slow breath, and looks at her reflection with a calm, steady gaze. Back in the United States, the success of the album brings her to the pinnacle of the music industry. She wins her first Grammy Award, and the ceremony is a grand affair at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. But the memory that stays is not the flash of cameras, but a private moment afterward. In her hotel suite, high above the city, Whitney stands by the window, the glass of water cool in her hand. The city below is a river of lights, cars moving silently through the night like a gentle current. She can see the distant hills, dark and quiet, and above them, a few brave stars manage to shine through the urban glow. The room itself is softly lit, the bed turned down, a bouquet of white roses from someone thoughtful resting on the nightstand. She sits on the edge of the bed and listens to the hum of the city, a low, constant lullaby. There is no party to attend, no urgent phone call to make, only this quiet satisfaction, this feeling of a dream realized. She thinks about her New Jersey home, the magnolia tree, the church in Newark, and she feels a thread connecting all these places, a thread woven with song. Outside, a helicopter passes far away, its blinking light a tiny, wandering star, and she watches it until it disappears behind a building. Then she turns out the lamp and lets the night wrap around her. The years roll forward, and Whitney's star continues to ascend. In 1987, her second album, Whitney, produces an unprecedented string of #1 hits. The recording sessions for this album are equally as serene as the first, held in the same studios with many of the same collaborators. One late evening, during the recording of I Wanna Dance with Somebody, the studio is transformed into a private sanctuary of joy. The lights are dimmed, but a disco ball has been hung from the ceiling as a playful touch, scattering pinpricks of light across the walls. Whitney sings the upbeat track with a smile that can be heard in her voice, yet the process remains unhurried. Between takes, the musicians joke softly, and the atmosphere is that of a late-night gathering among close friends. Outside the studio's soundproof walls, New York City sleeps under a blanket of fresh snow, the streets muffled and pure. The contrast between the warmth inside and the cold stillness outside is poignant, like a candle burning in a window. When they listen back to the song, even through the up-tempo rhythm, there is a clarity and ease in Whitney's voice that invites listeners to forget their worries and simply sway. It is a gift of pure, uncomplicated happiness, wrapped in the polish of a perfect pop record. And when the hour grows late, Whitney bundles up in a long coat and a scarf, stepping out into the crisp, silent air, her breath clouding before her face. The streets are empty, the snow pristine, and the city seems to be holding its breath, waiting for the dawn. By the end of the decade, Whitney Houston is not just a singer, she is a cultural touchstone. Yet her personal life remains grounded in the quiet rhythms she has always cherished. She purchases an even larger estate in the New Jersey countryside, a Georgian mansion surrounded by acres of rolling meadow and old forest. There is a stable with horses that nicker softly in the early morning and a walking path that leads to a small pond. In autumn, the trees blaze with orange and crimson, and in the winter, the landscape transforms into a silent world of white. Whitney walks the grounds often, bundled in a heavy sweater, her boots leaving prints in the frosty grass. She loves to stand at the edge of the pond and watch the water reflect the gray winter sky, a mirror untouched by sound. Inside the mansion, a grand piano sits in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows, and sometimes she sits there in the late afternoon, playing a few chords, humming a melody that no one has heard yet. The housekeeper moves quietly in the kitchen, preparing tea, and the fire in the library crackles with a gentle warmth. This is the hidden side of fame, not the red carpets, but the soft domesticity that protects the soul. And it is here, in these tranquil spaces, that Whitney gathers the strength for what will become her next great chapter, the one that will etch her voice into the hearts of even the most remote listeners across the globe.